This video lesson examines the sociology of culture. It also looks at various concepts related to culture. So let's go ahead and get started. First off, we have to ask ourselves, what is culture? According to sociologists, culture is any item or idea that does not occur naturally. This leads us to the conclusion that culture must be anything or any idea that is humanly created. In other words, culture includes items produced by humans, and the ideas attached to those items are also a part of culture. So let's look at an example. Sustenance is a biological necessity, but the how and what we eat is culture. People, as a group, decide how and what to eat. And that's why we have a variety of different cultures with different types of foods that are associated with them. So, for example, if you're used to eating caviar, you're probably part of a wealthy upper class group. But if you prefer hot dogs and beer, then you're probably part of the middle class or working class who enjoys a beer and a hot dog at a baseball game. We're going to take a look at different pictures and decide whether they qualify as culture. First off, we have a tree, a wooden chair, a germ, and a flu shot. So the pictures on the left are not part of culture. A tree grows naturally with very little human influence. You could argue that a human does decide where and when to grow a tree, but for the most part, the biological process of the tree is something that occurs naturally. When we turn that tree and harvest its material and convert it into a wooden chair, then that's part of culture. Wooden chairs aren't part of every society. A lot of Eastern societies don't use chairs at home. The germ is something that occurs naturally. However, a flu shot is something that is fostered and gathered by medical experts. A flu shot essentially is a set of new pathogens injected into our system at a very small scale so that we can build a resilience towards those pathogens. This is a technique that has been perfected over the years by medical experts and is definitely part of culture. Our knowledge, our science is all part of culture. Things that happen naturally are not culture. All of the different technologies that we have, as well as all of the different ideas that we attach to those technologies, are also part of culture. Let's take a look at something like skin color variation. Skin color variation is something that happens naturally. People are born with different shades of skin color, and this is something that happens genetically. It's inherited by our mother and father and our ancestors. However, when we start to categorize these physical characteristics into racial categories, this is part of culture. Race is not anything natural. Race is actually something socially constructed. We've created this through our culture. We've created the idea of race. For instance, why is it that we have an Asian category when there's a multitude of different quote-unquote Asian racial affiliations that one could have? There's Korean, there's Vietnamese, there's Chinese. Why do we all lump them into one single category? Indians are also called Asian as well, but Indians think of themselves as very differently from other Asian individuals. So again, the reason for this confusion is because race is something that is socially constructed and created by our culture. So here we have an X and Y chromosome, or in this case an XX chromosome. The X and Y chromosomes determine whether you're male or female, whether you're born with male reproductive organs or female reproductive organs. It also helps determine the amount of hormones in your body and the different types of hormones in your body. This happens on a natural scale, and people have, even though you might be born as a male, you might have a variety, more testosterone than other males or less testosterone than other males. So this is again something that happens biologically, but culturally speaking, when we start to attach something like, say, color to our genders, this is something that culture invents. This is something human created. So the fact that we attach um, high value to males with high testosterone is something that is culturally ascribed. It's not anything that says that in biology that dictates that this is the way society needs to be ordered, but as a culture, we have decided to put more value on certain male characteristics and certain female characteristics. So sociologists argue that culture is socially produced, and they also point out that often we think something as natural, such as the male and female differences and the different values we attach to those differences. However, these things are socially produced. They're constructed by individuals in society. We have to agree on the values that we attach to these things. For instance, this is very visible when we consider that the values towards different particular ideas and things in nature are really determined by the point in time that you're in, the particular area or arena in society that you're taking part in, the group that you belong to. So, for example, in Japan, it is considered very rude to walk and eat or drink at the same time. What you're supposed to do if you purchase something and you're out on a walk is you're supposed to stop, consume your food, throw away your whatever it is that is left over, and continue walking. It's considered very rude to the food maker. It's seen as an insult to the person that gathered and produced your food to walk and eat. So Japanese will stand in one place and finish their food until they're done, and then they can continue walking. So as you can see, much of what we consider as normal and take for granted, as well as what we think of as common sense, is actually a result of our culture, our society, the technology developed in that culture, as well as the customs and the norms developed in that particular culture. Let's briefly look at some of the components of culture. We have values. These are ideas about what is ideal. So for instance, what we find beautiful, what we find right and wrong, what we think of as good and bad. These compose of our values. Our norms are the expected behaviors of someone in a particular society. So they are cultural rules that govern our behavior in particular situations. So for instance, when it comes to the idea of marriage, men are typically expected to propose to women. When you're in a classroom, you're expected to listen and engage with the professor. So these are called norms in our society, and those who follow them help keep the flow of society going. And those who break the rules are disrupting the flow of society and tend to get reprimanded. So we become very aware of norms when we break them. Beliefs consist of ideologies, and ideologies has its own definition, which you should look up in your textbook. But these ideologies are often accepted as truth, even if they're not. So, for instance, once in Western society and European early society, we believed that the Earth was the center of the universe. However, we've now learned that this isn't the case, that humans are not the center of the universe, that in fact the Earth is just one of many planets that revolves around the sun. So our beliefs change as we learn more and more about our environment, about the nature of humans, and beliefs though can be extremely dangerous, can be extremely beneficial. Our beliefs dictate our behaviors, our norms, and our values. When the Spaniards and the English came over to the Americas, much ethnocentrism was exchanged. Ethnocentrism is a take it for granted sense of superiority over other cultures. It's this belief that your culture is right and other cultures are wrong. This can be a very dangerous situation and can lead to several misunderstandings as well as violence. Ethnocentrism also involves judging other cultures only through the perspective of your own culture. So you judge the practices of other cultures through the lens of your own society and customs and norms. So ethnocentrism is something that happens naturally when two different cultures, groups of people meet. However, it can be fairly harmless, or so happens when two different cultures meet, and it's fairly natural to happen. Sometimes it can be very harmless. Sometimes it is just the inevitable outcome of intercultural interaction. However, ethnocentrism can become very extreme, and it can also have destructive consequences where entire cultures are wiped out, and that's the most extreme form of ethnocentrism. You're not destroying and killing a person. What you're doing is destroying, killing an entire culture and erasing it from history. This is the most extreme form of ethnocentrism and something practiced several times over against the Native Americans by the Europeans. So, for instance, there's a history of American Indian boarding schools where American Indians, who were already part of established societies with their own set of hierarchies, norms, beliefs, values, etc., were put into American boarding schools. Their names changed, their culture stripped. They were put into more European looking clothes, given different European names, and taught customs and taught to forget their language and their culture. So the opposite of ethnocentrism is cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is defined as the practice of assessing a culture only from that culture's point of view. So this involves putting yourself in the shoes of the person from the other culture. Why does it make sense for them to do that? There must be some logic there. Even if that logic doesn't make sense to us, it's not right for us to make fun of it. It's not right for us to think that we're better than them for some reason. Our logic can be just as funny. Our logic can be just as backwards as other cultures. For us, our culture is normal, and for them, our culture is strange. We're the strange ones from their point of view. So this is saying that culture is relative. Lastly, let's take a look at the different cultural types. First, there is, in a society, the mainstream culture. So this is the normal and dominant ways of doing things. These are the very dominant beliefs and values and set of norms that exist in a particular culture. They run through the entire culture. And then we have what is called a subculture. Now, the subculture may do a particular practice or hobby different from the mainstream culture, but the subculture doesn't necessarily threaten the mainstream culture in any direct way. Subcultures can include things like sports activities and individuals that gather to practice these sports. It can also include cooking groups. It can include a variety of different music genres. But at the end of the day, the subculture just exists a little bit differently than the mainstream culture, but doesn't necessarily try to destroy the mainstream culture. A counterculture, on the other hand, attempts to alter or destroy the mainstream culture and replace it with something else. So the mainstream culture is attacked by the counterculture. The counterculture says the mainstream culture is wrong. We need to change what is wrong about the mainstream culture. So, for instance, one example of counterculture are things like anti-capitalist groups or anti-consumerist groups who are against this idea that people should work so that they can consume more and more things and accumulate more and more material goods. They believe that this is inhumane. They believe that this is not the way that humans were meant to live. So this is an example of a counterculture. They wish to replace that aspect of mainstream culture.